do. But this is the 10th of our 12 Zoom meetings. And we have racial justice tomorrow, and then we wrap up with reproductive rights on Thursday with Kayla Montgomery and Deborah Alsheler. And so this has been, I think, a pretty good series of conferences for everybody. Everybody seems to be pleased with them. Tonight's, as I emailed you guys, is a little bit different. It's more story time about what happened rather than specific legislation. So I'm going to turn it over to, I think, is Karen going first? I think you're going first, Karen, right?
Yeah, that's the plan.
Okay,
definitely.
Go ahead and start, and welcome, and thanks for participating with us.
Sure. I don't know if any of you remember Odds Bodkin, the storyteller, but I'm going to try to channel him for this storytelling time. One thing that Rob had asked is if I explain what the deputy speaker is. It is sort of nebulous, but two of the primary, well, the primary thing is if the speaker is unable to be at the podium during a legislative session, then I get up there and stand in his stead. The other things are basically when bills are introduced, as many of you know, I'm sure the bills have to get referred to the appropriate committee. So that's the other part of my job, and I worked very closely with the Speaker Pro Tem, Lucy Weber, who's also on this call this evening. Hello, Lucy. I always value her assistance. But beyond that, what the Deputy Speaker does is basically whatever the Speaker asks the Deputy Speaker to do. And in my case, I helped him and am continuing to help him with appointments to study committees and commissions. And then, as it all turned out, in the time of COVID, I ended up helping quite a bit getting us up and running after things really changed in our world and we had to move to remote. So, you know, Rob said that it has been said that I was the key person in getting things up and running remotely. I just want to say that nothing would have been possible without the incredible assistance of the staff of the House, especially the Chief of Staff, Eileen Kelly, House Committee Services, the IT department, our House Clerk. I mean, it was an enormous effort, and it couldn't have been done without a lot of support. And I have to also give a shout out to our speaker, who was absolutely committed right from the beginning to get us up and running on a remote basis. And Representative Weber also assisted in that, and it was a big job. I'm going to try to tell this story. It's a pretty long one. It involves technical aspects, but I did send out to the House rules, which nobody would have expected you to read all of them, but the House rules, and I know there are some that are candidates here and some who are long-term members. So for those who have been around longer than me even, you know this, but the House rules basically form the backbone of how we operate. And there were a couple of rules that really came into play as this session rolled along, which I'll refer back to. The other thing that I sent out to you was the emergency order from the governor, which permitted remote meetings. So just to take us back to, you know, it seems like forever ago, long ago and far away, it was March 12th. And the House had deadlines, and we were required to finish all the bills, vote on the bills that had come down through the pipeline. I call it the Python. There's a huge, you know, we have hundreds and hundreds of bills that we have to get through. And that particular night, we had about 300 bills to get through. And of course, looming over us all, and this is where it gets to be like Grimm's fairy tales, I guess, was the threat of COVID. And we were all acutely aware that a huge majority of us probably shouldn't be sitting cheek by jowl with the coronavirus looming over us. But we also knew that we had work to do, and so we pressed on. Politicians being politicians, it seemed as though every bill for which there was an argument, nobody was really that able to curtail everything that they wanted to say about it. It's just very challenging because everybody's very dedicated to the bills that they have. And then there are various obstruction type maneuvers. There was a lot of that sort of thing. And so everything became very, very prolonged. And in the meantime, it became clear to us that things were probably going to go, we weren't going to be able to meet again anytime soon. And so the speaker and the majority leader commenced to start meeting with the minority leader, Representative Hinch, to see if we couldn't come up with a solution under the rules for which that would permit us to go forward and to authorize the speaker to take certain actions that needed to be taken. And of course, at that point, nobody, I mean, it's crazy to think, I'm not sure how many people even knew what Zoom was, but we knew things were going to change. So I was jumping up and down. I was in the podium several times while the speaker and Representative Lay would negotiate. They weren't able to come to an agreement. They'd come back. It was 11 o'clock. It was midnight. And the real basis of the disagreement, we were trying to, chart a path forward. The Republicans were insisting that before they agree to the terminology, we should retract the reprimands that were issued to a certain number of the members who refused to take sexual harassment training. In addition, they wanted a commitment from us that we would not proceed to reprimand the other individuals for whom we had not yet taken action. Well, needless to say, that presented a very big problem because everyone is very committed to the need for sexual harassment training, and we weren't going to go along with that. But sooner or later, through whatever mechanism, they were able to come to an agreement, and it was House Rule 65B. Now, and I'm telling you this because it does come into play later. Rule 65, every session, you have to come up with all the deadlines pursuant to which you have to pass the bills. And everything has a deadline. And it was clear that we weren't going to meet our deadlines. So that's part of Rule 65. So 65B said, in an effort to thwart the spread of COVID-19 after concurrence from the Democratic and Republican leadership and public health officials about best practices concerning the safety of the representatives, staff, and public, the deadlines may reasonably be amended at the discretion of the Speaker of the House to be timely noticed in the House calendar. So I read that because you can see the basis of the rule had to do with public health and safety, not policy. So we got through the night. It was very tortured. We didn't leave. In the end, we managed to finish all the bills, and we left at about 4:30 in the morning. And many of the members who were there will remember at about 2, there was a motion to adjourn, and all kinds of shenanigans were going on all night long. But we finished. And so at that point, I remember the speaker saying, well, we won't reopen until April 3rd or something like that, which was only a couple of weeks away. Well, I don't think anybody could begin to understand at that point what we had ahead of us. I think we were all reeling. And so, the first thing was we just had to come to terms with the fact that we weren't going to be able to complete our work. And so for the candidates, there are certain bills that have to go to, they're like I don't know, say it's a bill that has a policy matter in it, but it also needs an appropriation. Those are called second committee bills. And so we had maybe 30 or 40 bills that had to go to second committees. So we met with the speaker, created a legislative continuity committee, and Representative Hinch and Packard and Representative Rice, as I recall, were on it, and Representative Weber, me, I forget who all, it was maybe 5 or 6 people. And we met, and basically the consensus was that we were going to go ahead and do everything we needed to do to get through our second committee bills. And from that point on, it was basically figuring out the technology, reviewing all the House rules to see what was affected. I mean, the speaker even had to interpret one to say that we could meet remotely. We had to figure out if there were amendments that were going to be proposed to certain bills, how that would work. The people from the Office of Legislative Services were spread out in their various homes. Everybody was remote, and it was an extremely challenging thing. On top of it all, you will recall we have right to know laws, and under the right to know laws, the statutes require that you provide a place in person for people to meet. So the governor, and that's why I gave you the emergency order, issued an emergency order that basically set forth the provisions pursuant to which you could meet on a remote basis. And there were various requirements there, which you can see. As a legislature, we could sort of set our own sort of terms on how we were going to operate, but under the circumstances, we followed the emergency order as issued by the governor. We did need a couple of interpretations from the Attorney General just to clarify. So we were watching the right to know laws. I mean, you know, we didn't all know all there was to know about technology. We were learning about different technologies that would provide the best opportunities. It was a lot to learn, a lot to grapple with. And in the meantime, we just had this, you know, desire to continue to function as a legislature because we realized what an incredibly important role we had to provide. Well, it became, and so, you know, although up front it may have seemed like it took forever before we finally announced that we were going to have an executive session for this bill or that bill, and even at that, it was a very small thing, but we were establishing protocols. We didn't want to get Zoom bombed. We had to figure out the right technology, and also to comply with the right to know laws and to make sure, frankly, that we didn't fall flat on our faces. We had to staff each thing maybe 3 or 4 staff deep. So we had to train people to host them because we really have very minimal IT staff. We had to train people to host them that were usually just committee researchers. They did an unbelievable job. And then we had to have like all kinds of backup to make sure people could get on so the public could access it properly, etc. And then we had to figure out ways for people to be able to testify when we ultimately got to the hearing stage. Well, every time before we scheduled a hearing, we would always advise the deputy Republican leader of what we were doing. The speaker had many conversations with the minority about what we were doing, and I was in charge of approving the schedule of any hearing, and I did not do that until the speaker had a conversation with the minority leader. So there was a lot of communication. Anyway, it became increasingly clear that there was just no way we were going to get through all the tasks that we had to do. And so that was when we started proceeding to try to prioritize the bills. The calls went out to the chairs to start looking at all the bills that they had and to prioritize them to try to figure out what we could do. We were working with the Senate. And at that time, the speaker told the chairs to email the ranking members, which are the top members on the, sorry, I just looked at the chat, to email all the Republican ranking members on the prioritization. And we have the emails. There was a lot of hue and cry saying that we didn't communicate with them. They were communicated with. And there was a collaborative effort there. So as we were doing all our prioritization and sort of figuring out the bills and how we would proceed, we obviously still needed to change the rules, because you couldn't vote on bills unless the deadlines were changed. So for instance, if we wanted to vote on a Senate bill or a House bill, and that bill, and in our rules, it said that it had to be voted on by April 15th, that wasn't going to happen unless we came to a new deadline. So we went to the minority, and we wanted to come to some consensus so we could finish our work and come up with a new set of deadlines. And that was when we started hearing about how we weren't working collaboratively, how under Rule 65B, you know, that it was more of a policy thing, and I just read it to you. That was not necessarily the case, even though we worked hard to work with them. And at that point, the other thing that came into play was that obviously the revenues were decreasing. And for those of you who are concerned about revenue, you know that there was recently a decrease in the business taxes, increase in the property taxes, decrease in the business taxes. And there was a trigger put into place that was negotiated by the governor that if our revenue dropped below a certain point, the way it was set up, our business tax rates would go up to fill in the hole. But the minority wanted us not to go forward with that trigger. They wanted us to allow them to introduce a bill to leave the business tax rates in place. Well, the final determinations on the revenues hadn't been made yet. That also felt like more blackmail. And so we didn't go along with that. And the upshot was that when we went to to meet at UNH, and to get that up and running was another Herculean effort. I just can't even express how much work that took. No, we did not get the 2/3 vote that we needed to change the rules to amend the deadlines, which meant that all the work that we had done to get through our second committee bills, all the Senate bills that had come over to us, all of that went out the window. So basically, they obstructed the legislative branch from moving forward with a huge majority of bills. Then we had to move to the omnibus process, which you all have heard about. Basically, what happened was the Senate had to take a House bill that had been passed, and that's like the Christmas tree, and then you hang all these other bills on it like ornaments, and the primary bill is the vehicle. So some bills, you could have upwards of 30 additional priority pieces of legislation on them, and others you might just have a couple. There were some that just went through by themselves. And under the rules, a concurrence only needs a majority vote. So after the Senate passed their the House bills, they came to us, and we met on June 30th, and we voted on bills. We basically concurred on the bills that the Senate passed over. I think maybe there was one that we didn't concur on. And those were very largely partisan votes, as you might expect. At that time, the other thing the Speaker tried to do was to introduce a resolution whereby we would get a constitutional amendment on the ballot that would permit us to meet remotely in times of national emergency that did not involve an enemy attack. And if you're Constitution buffs, you can read Article 5A, and you will see continuity of government in case of enemy attack. Well, this was an enemy of a different sort. So I probably have talked a lot. I think a lot of people want to know what comes in the future. So if you want me to keep talking, yes? Okay. Yeah, so whatever you want me to do.
Yeah, I think people are asking questions about how we move forward
Okay.
and what
So,
to
so
expect. So
right. So the next step is that procedurally, in addition to voting a bill thumbs up or thumbs down, there's a process whereby a bill is sent into interim study. And what happens is the committees take the bills that were voted into interim study and they analyze them some more, and they decide whether or not a bill should be recommended for additional legislation. And that's the process that's going through right now. We have 74 bills that are distributed amongst most of the standing committees, and we're going through the interim process on a remote basis. And now we have our protocols in place, but there's a lot of committees that never met remotely. We're going through trainings, and then they're doing remote work sessions. And so Representative Bartlett referred at the earlier part of the session that Commerce has, and it always does, have many bills that they're having to go through. And that's what's going on now. And you can find all the notices in the calendar to get on the meetings. So I know there's great interest in trying to figure out what's going to happen to the future. We're human, I would say, in the leadership, just like everybody else. And it's really hard to know what's going to come in the future. And I think that we're trying to plan for all the eventualities. Worst case is that we absolutely have to remain 100% remote. The problem here is that, as you know, hundreds of bills are introduced every year. There's a great deal of pent-up demand because there were hundreds of bills that didn't go anywhere that people are very interested in seeing go forward. One can expect that many of those bills are going to end up being refiled. There will be new bills. We're still very much in remote territory. In the old days, we could meet 17 committees at the same time. There's just no way we can do that. We don't have the staff. Even if we bought licenses, like out the wazoo, as they say, we just don't have all the staff that we need to run that many meetings at the same time. If we are able to run meetings in person, we would anticipate that we'd have to do them in double rooms, in the finance room, everybody spread out. And then I'm very interested in trying to get funding to do live streaming from the various committee rooms, because that will give, as nice as Zoom is, I would like to see a live stream opportunity so people could just view through live stream. And then what would have to happen is if people want to testify, they'd have to sign up to testify, and a limited number of people could come in. But the days of, tens and dozens of people sitting in committee rooms watching our committee meetings, even if things loosen up enough so that we're able to have in-person meetings, the days of packing out the LOB, I think, are over, at least for a while. And that makes me sad, because I think it gives the legislative process vibrancy, and it permits a huge number of people to advocate that might otherwise not be able to. We're going to have to go through remote means. We're going to have to go through emails and all that sort of stuff. And as far as the legislature, at this point, we still are in a position where we're required by the Constitution to meet remotely. Not meet remotely, but to meet in person. We're hoping to meet at UNH, but if UNH has ice hockey and there's ice, we can't meet at UNH again. And so other alternatives have to be found. And I guess I'll just wrap up with that. I think those of us who are in the legislature now, those that are running and those that advocate and believe in the three branches of government, we're incredibly important to the future of the state of New Hampshire, especially if our governor remains Republican. And you can see the vetoes that have come down. There are many things we all care about, and we just can't move forward. We move forward in a much worse way if we can't even operate the legislature. So with that, I will conclude and just say, at least now we know what Zoom is.
Thank you so much, Representative. That was, I guess I should say Deputy Speaker.
Please.
That was extremely helpful to give people an idea of just what sorts of challenges and obstacles that the legislature, particularly the House with its 400 members, faced in trying to respond to this really unprecedented situation that we found ourselves mid-session. And so I really just want to thank you tremendously for the work that you did, and also the speaker. I've learned how important a role that Eileen Kelly played in making it possible for the House and ultimately then the Senate to come back together to meet and to do the people's business. And I know that for Kent Street, watching from the outside and looking in, there were moments of frustration where we didn't understand the full extent of those challenges, both from a health perspective, a technological perspective, and a political perspective. And so it's extraordinarily helpful to hear you convey that tonight and to give us all a sense of just how it looked from the inside as you were trying to confront those challenges, and the enormous commitment that the leadership had, the Democratic leadership in particular had, to making sure that you all were fulfilling your constitutional roles, not only as individually elected representatives, but also as a legislative body and as one of the three co-equal branches of government. We were always very aware that the representatives were reaching out to constituents and continuing to do that sort of constituent service, which was more necessary than ever given the challenges of COVID, both from a health and economic perspective. So to hear the commitment, though, to making sure that the body as a whole was fulfilling its roles and responsibilities as required by the Constitution is really encouraging. It inspires me. I'm grateful that there were Democrats there and for the incredible work you did. We're disappointed as a citizen advocacy group of the obstacles that were thrown in your way by Republicans, both in leadership and just the Republican membership that unfortunately, time after time, made the choice to obstruct the people's business rather than to engage and further the people's business. So I just want to, on behalf of Kent Street and advocates in general, thank you and your team and Democrats in general, all of those who were there for that night of the, how is it called?
The long march. That's Lucy Weber's term.
Yeah, thank you, Lucy. That was a heroic moment, really, to make sure that you were getting these bills passed over to the Senate, meeting that crossover deadline. And that ultimately is what allowed a lot of work to get done. I know we're frustrated with the governor's vetoes, yet it shows just how committed the Democrats have been to getting things like minimum wage, paid family leave, environmental protections, telemedicine, just one thing after another that are so important. And I just want to express our appreciation and gratitude on that. I wanted to say a few words about Kent Street Coalition because the whole COVID, we are all volunteer, despite what the governor says, who calls us paid volunteers, whatever that means. We are an all volunteer grassroots advocacy organization. And a large part of our work has been focused on advocacy happening at the State House, where the folks that you've been seeing in the halls holding signs, trying to meet with legislators, talk with legislators, give testimony in hearings, and really so appreciative in New Hampshire that we have such an accessible State House, and that average folks are able to participate in democracy in a very fundamental way. So obviously that was significantly disrupted by COVID. And there were times when we felt quite frustrated by that we didn't have the same access, that we didn't necessarily know how things were going to unfold. And we had to make adjustments in how we do our work. You know, State House visibility is only a piece of what we do. We also do reach out with letters to the editor. We do outside visibilities. We try to contact voters. We do voter education. We've done an enormous amount of canvassing on behalf of candidates. So there's a wide range of things that we as Kent Street, as a progressive grassroots organization, do, but a huge focus of that work has been visibility at the State House and the interactions that has provided us as we are crowding those hallways. I recognize we often were the crowds in the hallways, but with that opportunity to really talk to legislators, quite frankly, on both sides of the aisle. Although I think we came to see our role increasingly as being there as hopefully the kind of wind beneath the wings of our friends, saying, we so appreciate the work you're doing. We know how hard you work. We know that this is essentially a volunteer job, and we want you to know how much we appreciate that. So with the State House being closed and the Legislative Office building being closed, we've had to look for new ways to do the advocacy we do. And it looks like in the future, we will also have to look for new and creative ways to engage with our legislators and to help you all feel supported in the work you do, and also to bring challenges when we see Republicans in particular taking positions that we profoundly disagree with. So it looks like we'll probably be greeting you outside a lot more than we've been greeting you inside. We'll be buying rain and snow gear and making sure that we're dressed for the weather so that we can be there. We hope that you will be looking for us and taking a moment to stop and talk with us. We also, though, looking forward, you know, this has shaken things up and given us a new opportunity to look at how we do business, because ultimately the People's House should be open to all people. It should not be defined by geography and access. And to the extent that this helps us all understand how we might better create opportunities for people who live across the state to engage in the legislative process, I think that is a very exciting opportunity, and one that we at Kent Street look forward to. One of the things that we did before COVID hit was to create a virtual visibility program, recognizing that some people can't get to the State House because they are disabled, because they're watching children, because they live in the far north, they don't have transportation. So we started holding signs with people's names and pictures on them and why they were not able to be there. My hope is that those folks maybe will have new opportunities to be there, whether it be through remote streaming of House hearings, some opportunities to give remote testimony, those sorts of new innovations that I think we can learn from this experience and incorporate moving forward so that we do have a much more accessible House and Senate and legislature. I truly look forward to that. And I just want to say that one of the things that I want to mention is that Kent Street is not alone when we're at the State House doing either virtual visibility or in-person visibility. We've always looked to these, to the independent groups that are out there, the independent expenditure groups, many of whom have joined us on these, on this program and offered their knowledge and wisdom and insights. These are folks that that Kent Street works very closely with, and I'm glad that we've had an opportunity to highlight some of the work that these folks are doing both at the legislature and in the broader advocacy community, because we are very aware, profoundly aware, that we work in coalition, and we look to our friends in these communities to help us move issues forward at the State House and more broadly across the state. So I want to do a shout out to all of the folks from the independent expenditure community who have joined these sessions or will be joining, like Planned Parenthood, like ACLU, like the Medical Society, like the Fiscal Institute, just enormous resources available both to legislators and to advocates. So I think that with that, that was my kind of some of the things that I wanted to convey. We do have questions in the chat box, but before we go there, Lucy, was there anything that I said that you might want to respond to, or before we go to questions?
No, I don't think so. I think Karen gave a very reasoned explanation of a completely unreasonable time, and I have to say that some of it I had actually suppressed. So thank you very much, and thanks to all of you for putting on this series, because it's a monumental effort, and it's really exciting. I guess I would join with Karen and say that, you know, one of the things we want to look at is ways of, just as we did with telehealth, of using this opportunity to advance the way we engage with our citizens and use it to find ways that we can get more people to participate, and both for our citizens and for our members. So that's one thing. The other thing to remember, that's one further frustration that Karen didn't mention, is of course, we have no power to actually make firm plans for anything for the next legislature, because our power ends at midnight on the first Wednesday of December. And the next legislature has to actually organize itself and elect a speaker before it can do anything further. So when you hear from the Republicans that, oh, the Democrats have already decided everything and they've never talked to us, first of all, they have been talked to. And secondly, we can't decide anything now for what's going to happen in January, both because we don't know what the legislature's going to look like and because we don't know what COVID will look like at that point. So, you know.
Thank you.
Can I ask the first question here? There's a lot of people that want to know about free dummies and why free dummies should be put behind the Republicans instead of the Democrats. You've got about 5 questions. And then Marsha Haywood wants to know, well, who are free dummies and what is their section?
I don't know what free dummy is. Is that the free staters? Or
I can deal with that, and it was actually discussed in the meeting that you weren't in this morning.
oh,
And again, I don't know what I'm allowed to talk about in public or not, because that was not at all a public meeting. What they're talking about are the Republicans who refuse to wear masks to our group meetings. And as a result, the speaker designated a particular section for them to sit in. And the theory was that they would not only sit in that section, they would have their own bathroom. None of us would have to intermingle with them. But unfortunately, that section is behind a section of Democrats, and their behavior is very bad, and they need to be moved, and that's going to be discussed, I believe, in our caucus tomorrow, but I don't feel free to say anything about it right now. But it certainly is an issue that has been discussed and thought about, so I'll let the speaker talk to the caucus about it tomorrow.
Let me ask a different kind of question. Dave Doherty wants to know if there's a plan on how you're going to prioritize bills next term if we're under COVID.
Rob, if I could. And
yes, please, Gary.
The free dumb is from the term, they call themselves the freedom section. And so people have just separated the two, and that's where the free dumb comes from. That was the original question. What's the free dumb? Well, that section that Lucy and they were talking about called themselves the freedom section. Freedom from that.
Freedom from masks and everything else, I guess. I don't know.
And they don't sit behind the Republicans. They sit behind our Democrats.
That's right.
Right.
And they
should be behind the Republican.
They can't call the whole time.
Yes.
Okay, so tell us about prioritizing bills under COVID, Karen, next time, and what you think you might be able to do. Because you're not, I think you said before, you're not going to be able to do 300 or 400 bills, are you? Or
well, 300 or 400 bills would be a dream come true, Rob.
Or 1,000.
Usually they're like 1,000.
Yeah,
I think the first thing is to just make a plea that people really think twice before they introduce a bill, and that they prioritize their bill introduction themselves. Again, as Lucy said, we can't really make that much of a plan until we know what's going on in the next election, but our process generally is a very inclusive one, and that is that the caucus meets and that we determine what the priorities of the caucus are, whether it's, education, gun control, whatever. And then I think we would look at the bills that have been introduced, and if we have to prioritize, I guess that's what we would do. I mean, I hate the thought of having to do it that way again, because there's a lot of things that, maybe are really important that don't fit one category or another. And it's very challenging. So I would say, Dave, that we would meet again as a caucus, figure out what our priorities are, and then do something similar to what we did before. But that all will need to be discussed more thoroughly.
So Chris Schultz had a question. It's not a technology question, it's not a health question, but it's one that I think is important for us to consider. There was when the House didn't meet before at the Whittemore Center, there was some booing when it came to Black Lives Matter being mentioned. And we're coming up on the veto day where reps will be gathering once again in the Durham State House. And the question is there a plan to deal with that sort of behavior if it comes up during this session? Because it's extraordinarily, disconcerting and inappropriate, and just wanting to know if leadership has thought about that and how reps might be encouraged to respond.
Well, it's always the speaker's prerogative to, take action when things like that happen, and ask either for it to be terminated or for a member to be removed. I haven't spoken directly with the speaker about what would happen if those things occur, but, you know, it shouldn't be tolerated. I don't think I know what she's referring to. Sometimes the speaker doesn't hear what other people hear, and we were stretched out even more than ever that particular day. But from what I've observed of the speaker, I think when he hears things that are inappropriate, he speaks. And if I happen to be in the podium, I would as well. So, you know, the question relates directly to Black Lives Matter, but there's other things. They boo other members, and that's when the free dummies really get active.
Yeah, and I think the idea was just to put the thought of what can we do to anticipate that,
right.
Knowing where things are, how can we be anticipating and having a plan ahead of time to respond?
Right.
Because unfortunately, we're seeing from a national and at a national level, particularly, some of this sort of behavior being encouraged and promoted. So it's probably.
Well, I would just say that it is always anticipated that things are going to happen like that. And anyway, I appreciate the comment.
Thank you.
Karen, Tim Horgan asked the question about why can't we hire enough staff, which I think is an interesting question. I mean, if we have to, I understand you don't know until December, even if you're going to be in charge, but if we have to go through a whole nother session of COVID, is it possible to find money to hire more staff so you can operate more efficiently? Or is there do you have to have a 2/3 vote and includes all the Republicans?
No, you don't need a 2/3 vote. I mean, it is a matter of staffing and it is a matter of money. And so you have to go through and sort of understand how much staff you need to do any particular thing. You also have to get the licenses purchased. I mean, what I hope is that our systems are refined enough now that we don't need to go 3 or 4 deep on a particular hearing, and maybe it could just be a couple people. But, you know, when you hire more staff, you need more people, you need more room to put the staff. And I mean, you know, if we were going to run 17 hearings at a time, we might need 20 people. I mean, I just don't see that we have that capability with the finances that we have. But, you know, we're going to look at it for sure, especially if we're in the majority, which I hope we are.
Yeah, and this was something we talked to. Kat McGee raises a question that you and I talked about in preparation for this meeting, which is that Kat writes, it's even more important that Dems retain power so that we can make sensible rules while COVID-19 continues into 2010, or I think you meant 2020, Kat, with no vaccine. So you and I talked a bit about the importance of the rules and how it's hard for outsiders and even for rank and file members to understand just exactly what a big role those play in putting limits on how much you and the speaker and others can do, and that was one of the hurdles that you faced as you were trying to make things happen.
Right.
I just wondered if you might say a few words about that.
Well, I mean, I think I covered the bulk of it. I mean, the real problem was that because of COVID, we couldn't vote on the bills that we needed to vote on within the deadlines that were there, and we needed concurrence to go ahead and change the deadlines. The alternative is that you need a 2/3 vote to suspend the rules to change the deadlines. And to Kat's point, if you don't have 2/3 of your House Democrats, or if you don't have some reasonable Republicans to join with you to get that 2/3 vote, it wasn't going to happen. I can't express to you how incredibly frustrating it was.
The other thing to remember, though, is that when we adopt the rules initially,
right,
we adopt them by a majority. And we can
Right.
change them by a majority. Generally speaking, the way they've been written in the past is they get adopted on organization day by a majority, and then they can be revised generally through about the end of
2 or
January,
3 weeks.
also by a majority. After which everything has to be done by 2/3. And you can see why people would write them that way, because you don't want to start off every single session day for the entire session with the minority coming in and bringing in a new rules change, and you have to debate the rules change and vote down the rules change before you get to your actual business. But in this case, it played out really difficult, whatever that word would be as an
Well, and that the majority vote, that sort of explains why we could ban guns in the House chamber and things of that nature, because there's no way we could ever get a 2/3 vote. But the rules really are incredibly important, just like laws are to our lives. And unless you have that framework, it's really hard to operate. And so that's why we have a rules committee, and that's why most of the people, or I guess all the people on the rules committee, are part of leadership, because it shows you how important the rules are. But there is monkey business that can go along there. So it gets
Hey,
very
that's
tough.
great. Louise, you have some last question you want to ask her?
No, I think I
You're
just
all set.
want to make an observation, which is that, we came to understand over time all the various challenges that leadership was dealing with, and in terms of, particularly on the House side with 400 members, the logistics of that was pretty astounding, and that over the course of preparing for tonight's talk and talking with the deputy speaker, I got an even better understanding of just how profound the challenges were, and a deeper understanding and appreciation for the effort to try to find a way to move forward those legislative issues that we as Democrats have worked so hard to elect a majority of Democrats to the House. And I found myself increasingly grateful for the fact that we had such a strong majority. So it gives me hope and inspiration, and it makes me want to work all the harder to make sure that we are there, that we are the ones, that the Democrats are the ones who will be shaping this next session as we move forward. So that's my final thought on it.
I think that I'd like to just end by making sure I understand what Sue Mullen said. When she said the winds are blowing strong and right, I think she hoped she meant left in Bedford. And I hope to see you all at the swearing in, and hope you bring folks with me. I'm hoping that's true in Bedford. I'm praying that's true in Bedford. We have a lot of challenges. The House is what we're relying on. The Senate has steep challenges. The Executive Council has even tougher challenges. And so all of you guys in the House, keep up the fight. Please take your majority, expand your majority, work hard. We're working with you, and let's go on. And any of you candidates, first-time candidates that have primaries on Tuesday, good luck. And thank you, Karen. Thank you, Louise. And tomorrow night we have racial justice with Rennie Cushing and Jordan Thompson, 6 o'clock. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Everybody. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Oh,
Thank you, Karen.
yeah, bye.